The noodle stall opened at 6 every morning. Ren Hao was always there first, before the steam, before the district woke up, before the Crimson Tier's enforcers finished their night rounds and wandered back to their corner posts with their red sashes tucked into their jackets and their eyes flat and satisfied. He lit the burner, dropped the bones into the pot, and stood with his hands at his sides while the water came to heat. He was 32 years old. He had run the stall since his father died. He had never missed a morning. The Kaiwen district did not love its residents. It tolerated them the way a man tolerates a stone in his shoe, aware of it, annoyed by it, never bothering to stop and remove it. The streets were narrow and permanent damp, the shop fronts patched with whatever material had been cheapest that season, the overhead wiring strung between buildings in great drooping loops that nobody was responsible for and everybody feared. 3 blocks north of Ren's stall, the Crimson Tier had its district headquarters in what used to be a textile warehouse. The loading bays bricked over, the windows painted out, the red lanterns hanging above the door the only signal anyone needed about who ran this part of the city. Everyone in Kaiwen knew who ran it. You paid your protection fee on the 1st of the month. If you were late, a pair of enforcers came by with their red sashes and explained what being late cost. If you were late again, the explanation was physical. If you thought about reporting any of this to the 9th Precinct, you either laughed at yourself or were told, very gently, by someone who knew, that Chief Lao Yun's second car and his daughter's school tuition both came from the same source as the explanation you'd just received. Nobody made it to a third late payment. Nobody filed a report that went anywhere. The district ran the way the district ran, and the people in it built their lives in the spaces the syndicate left available. And that was that. Ren Hao built his life in the space of one stall, 6 in the morning to 8 in the evening, 6 days a week. He had a system. The bones went in first, simmered 3 hours. The oil was pressed from seeds his supplier in the western quarter had been delivering since his father's time. The noodles were hand-cut. Ren did it himself. A knife rhythm he could do in total darkness, even, his wrists rolling with the same patience he applied to everything. His customers were regulars. He knew their orders before they sat. He did not make conversation beyond what was required. He was not cold about it. He simply did not waste. Not words, not motion, not the sliver of calm the district allowed him. His father had taught him that too. Liang Hao had been a remarkable man, and a quiet one. He had run the same stall before Ren, and before the stall he had spent 30 years doing something he never fully described, only implied, in the careful way he moved and the specific things he taught his son. What Ren understood by the time he was 20 was that his father had given him something enormous. The training had started when Ren was 4 years old and ended the day his father sat him down in the stall's back room, the year Ren turned 22, and said, "I've given you everything I have. Now I'm going to ask you for one thing back." The vow was simple. Ren would not use what his father had given him on men. Not to hunt, not to punish, not to settle the district's debts or anyone else's. The stall would be their life. The training would be their private thing, contained. The world does not become better, his father said, because one strong man decides it should. It becomes better slowly, over time, the way a bone makes soup, not by force, just by staying in the water long enough. He put his hand on Ren's shoulder. "You'll want to break it. You'll see things that will make you want to. Don't." Ren had kept it. He had kept it through the first year, when the Crimson Tier's people raised the protection fee 20% and 3 stalls on the block couldn't absorb the increase and closed. He had kept it when old Shen from the hardware shop 2 doors down had his hand broken for paying a week late, and sat in Ren's stall all afternoon with his hand wrapped in a dish towel, and Ren had fed him soup and said nothing because there was nothing to say that wasn't going to make it worse. He had kept it through the slow accumulation of small violences that the district absorbed the way pavement absorbs rain, not storing it, not releasing it, just taking it in until eventually it had nowhere else to go. 10 years he had kept it. Then they came for his sister. May was 26. She taught reading at the elementary school at the district's south end, a job that paid almost nothing and that she showed up to every day with a canvas bag full of materials she'd bought herself, because the school's budget was what it was. She walked the same 3 blocks home every evening. Everybody on those 3 blocks knew who she was. The Crimson Tears people knew who she was. Her brother ran the noodle stall. Her brother paid his fee on time, kept his head down, caused no trouble. None of that mattered to the 2 enforcers who'd had a bad collection night in the Weilong block and decided the walk home was an opportunity. Ren found out from his neighbor's daughter, who had seen it happen and hidden behind a market cart and come to the stall at 7 in the morning, shaking so hard she couldn't speak for the first 2 minutes. May was at the district hospital. She was alive. She was asking for Ren. He walked to the hospital. He sat with his sister for 4 hours. He held her hand and did not say the things that were moving through him, because she did not need them. She needed him present and quiet, so he was present and quiet. When she fell asleep, he walked to the 9th precinct. Chief Lao Yun was a heavy-set man, with a pleasant face and the particular ease of someone who had never needed to be afraid of anything for a very long time. He listened to Ren's account across his desk, with his hands folded and his expression careful and professionally sympathetic. He took down the names of the 2 enforcers. Ren had learned them from the neighbor's daughter, who had recognized them from the block, and he said he would look into it personally. He closed the case 48 hours later. Inconclusive. Insufficient evidence to pursue. He was sorry for Ren's family's difficulty. Ren stood in the corridor outside Lao Yun's office for a moment, looking at the closed door. Then he went home. He went to the Crimson Tears district headquarters the following morning, not to fight, not yet, simply to speak. He knew what the vow allowed. The vow allowed him to speak. The man he was taken to was not Tong Sek, who was the district boss. It was one of Tong Sek's 3 captains, a man called Brace, who had the broad, unlived-in face of someone who had gotten where he was by being a reliable instrument. Ren told him who he was and why he'd come. Brace listened with the same professional courtesy as Lao Yun, which was to say, he listened the way a wall listens. Surfaces only, nothing passing through. "Men like you don't matter," Brace said. He wasn't being cruel. He was being accurate about how he understood the world. "You're a noodle man. Go home, open your stall. Your sister is alive." Ren looked at him for a moment. Then he went home and opened his stall. May recovered. She went back to the school after 6 weeks. She was quieter than before, not broken. His sister was not a person who broke easily, but quieter, with a new way of moving through spaces, careful about doors and corners. She never told Ren she was angry with him for not doing anything. She understood why. She had known about the vow since she was a teenager. She did not ask him to break it. He almost did then. 3 times in the following weeks, he almost did. He would feel it at night, the whole architecture of what his father had built in him, sitting in his muscles and his bones like a banked fire, patient and enormous. And he would think about Brace's face and Lao Yun's closed door, and he would get up and go and cut noodles in the dark, the knife moving, even, until the feeling passed. Then came the night of the fire. It started at 2 in the morning. Ren woke to the smell, not the clean smell of cooking fire, the wrong smell, acrid and spreading. And he was out of his cot and into the alley before he was fully awake. The stall was burning. Someone had gotten in through the side panel and poured something accelerant along the floor, and the flame had caught the oil reservoir, and now the whole front was going. Ren's first thought was the structure, whether it would spread to the buildings on either side. His second thought was Old Pak. Old Pak Chen was 74 years old and had lived above the stall in the building's 2nd floor since before Ren's father had opened the stall 40 years ago. He was deaf in one ear and slow on the stairs, and he would not have heard anything, and he would not have felt the smoke yet, not at the 2nd floor, not yet. Ren went up the exterior stairs. He got Old Pak out. The old man was confused and frightened, his hands clutching Ren's arm all the way down, and they made it to the alley, and Ren sat him against the opposite wall and went back to check whether the fire had spread to the neighboring building's lower floor. It hadn't. The alley gap was enough. and when he turned around, old Pak was sitting against the wall with his head tilted slightly to one side and his eyes half open, and it was immediately clear that it wasn't the fire that had taken him. His heart. The shock. He had been 74 years old, and his heart had done what hearts do at 74 when the world wakes them up at 2 in the morning with fire. Ren sat down next to old Pak for a while. He wasn't sure how long. The fire brigade came eventually. People came out of doors. Someone brought a sheet. After a while, Ren was sitting alone in the alley with the burnt-out shell of the stall in front of him, and the sheet-covered shape of old Pak beside him, and the night making its ordinary sounds overhead. He thought about his father. He thought about the soup. The world does not become better because one strong man decides it should. He sat there a while longer. Then he said the vow aloud, one last time, the whole thing, the words his father had used and the words he had answered with, clear and complete, because it deserved that. It had been a good vow. He had kept it faithfully and he did not regret keeping it, and he wanted the record, whatever record there was, to show that. Then he set it down. He stood up, he straightened his jacket. He walked toward the Crimson Tears district headquarters and he thought, as he walked, about what his father had actually given him over 30 years of mornings and evenings in the back room behind the stall, what the 10 years since had added to it, every fight he had watched in the streets, and the alley, and through windows and across market squares, every technique he had catalogued and absorbed without releasing, the full library of it sitting in him patient and unspent. He felt it differently now, not as something banked and waiting, as something waking. The headquarters night guard saw him coming and stood up from his stool, with his hand going to his collar, and Ren crossed the distance before the hand arrived and the night went quiet again. He didn't leave until morning. The first thing the district noticed was that 3 of the Crimson Tears' regular street posts were empty by 6 o'clock. The men who'd held those posts had not gone home to their families. They had not checked in. The Tears' internal network, a chain of corner phones and runner boys that Tong Sek had kept running for 11 years without a gap, registered the absence by 6:15, and by 6:30 the runner system was feeding information upward. Something had happened at the headquarters overnight. What had happened was specific and contained. Nobody had died. The headquarters was not burned or trashed. The men Ren had encountered were in various states of incapacity, none of them permanently damaged, all of them very clearly finished for the foreseeable future, and they were arranged in a way that was not random. The door guards were inside. The interior guards were in the interior room. The night shift captain was in the captain's office, sitting in the captain's chair, with the captain's logbook open in front of him at the page that listed the names of the 2 enforcers who had attacked May. The page had been circled, once, cleanly. Tong Sek was not in the headquarters that night. He heard about it from Brace at 7 in the morning. Brace was one of 3 district captains. He was also the one who had spoken to Ren. He did not make the connection immediately. The noodle man had come by weeks ago, polite, quiet, clearly going nowhere with it. This was something else. This was professional work. Brace told Tong Sek it had to be a rival, someone from the Eastgate block who'd been eyeing Kaiwen territory. The 2 men whose names were circled in the logbook were already in the wind. Brace's people had checked their flats, and both were empty, suitcases gone, suggesting they'd heard what happened overnight and decided Kaiwen wasn't somewhere they wanted to be found. Tong Sek was 56 years old and had built the Crimson Tier from a street-level debt operation into a district-spanning organization over 20 years, and he had not done that by panicking. He sat with Brace's report, and he considered it, and he made 2 decisions. First, he would add 2 men to each of the remaining street posts. Second, he would put out a quiet inquiry through the channels he maintained with the other district organizations. Had anyone moved into Kaiwen territory? Had anyone commissioned an outside operator to clear the field? The inquiry came back empty in 3 days. By then, things had gotten more complicated. The first-floor captain, a man named VOW, who ran the collection routes in the central market blocks, had gone to do a personally supervised round on the 3rd day after the headquarters incident, because VOW was a man who believed in showing the street that nothing had changed. He took 2 of his best men. He did not come back. His 2 men came back without him, supporting each other, and their account of what had happened was difficult for Brace to process because neither of them had clearly seen where the interference came from. It had been, they said, very fast. One moment they were on the street, the next VOW was gone from beside them, and they were on the pavement looking up. Brace went to the spot himself. There was nothing there except a small mark in the alley entrance that took him a while to understand. A folded piece of the Crimson Tears' standard red sash, left on the ground precisely, as if it had been set down rather than dropped. He brought it to Tong Sek. Tong Sek looked at it for a long time. He was a man who understood symbols. Someone was speaking to him through this, and the message was not ambiguous. The sash was theirs, and it was being returned to them, reduced, folded small, placed on the ground. Someone was telling them what they were. Find out who, he said. The Tears people started asking questions in the district. Not the rough kind, the careful kind, the kind that involves remembering who was awake on what night and what they saw. The district was full of people who had spent years carefully not seeing things, and this inquiry tested that habit, because the thing they were being asked about was not the Tear doing something to someone else, which was normal, but something being done to the Tear, which was not normal and which made people cautious about being on record with any opinion about it, because they didn't know yet what the right opinion was going to turn out to be. What the inquiry surfaced, eventually, through 3 layers of indirection, was this. On the night the noodle stall burned, someone had seen a man walk out of the alley behind the headquarters at first light, pause to straighten his jacket, and continue toward the district's interior streets. The man was lean, dark jacket, moved very calmly, and the stall that had burned was the one belonging to the man who had come by weeks ago, the one Brace himself had spoken to. The noodle man. Brace told Tong Sek. Tong Sek was quiet for a while. He's a noodle man, Brace said. He was, Tong Sek said. Now he doesn't have a stall. What does he have to lose? The question sat in the room for a moment. Tong Sek had spent 20 years building something that depended on a simple proposition. The people of the Kaiwen district did not have more to lose than they were afraid to lose. The protection fee worked because the loss of the stall, the flat, the shop, the fingers, those losses were terrifying, and the fear of them was the engine that kept the whole structure turning. A man without a stall, without a sister to protect, without a neighbor to worry about. A man who had been cut down to nothing and who had decided, somewhere in the burning dark of that alley, that nothing was actually an extremely clean place to operate from. That was a different kind of problem. Bring him in, Tong Sek said, quietly. They sent 6 men. 6 was not enough. The 6 men did not come back in the condition they left in, and the one who was capable of describing what had happened said he wasn't entirely sure what had happened, only that it had happened with great speed and no wasted motion, no unnecessary force, precise in a way that was, he struggled for the word, intentional. Like whoever was doing it had decided in advance exactly how much to use and was using exactly that much and not a fraction more. He wasn't angry, the man said. He looked like he was doing his laundry. By the time this report reached Tong Sek, the district had already started changing. It was subtle at first. The corner posts were still manned, but the men on them were noticeably more alert than usual. Not in the relaxed, certain way of men who know they're the ones with power, but in the watchful, narrow way of men who are no longer entirely sure. When they collected fees, they were faster, less inclined to linger. The shop owners on the central market blocks noticed this and filed it away without comment, the way Kaiwen residents had always filed things away. Carefully, privately, not yet sure what it meant. The district had spent 11 years learning to expect nothing. It was starting, very quietly, to expect something. Ren Hao moved through it like he moved through everything, without announcement, without performance. He had no stall. He had his father's backroom cot, which he'd moved to his sister's flat after the fire. He had his jacket, his knife, the noodle knife, which he didn't use for this but carried, and 40 years of accumulated patience that had spent 10 years specifically not being used and was now, with the VOW lifted, available in full. He was not angry, technically. Anger is a hot thing, disorganizing, and Ren was not disorganized. What he was, more precisely, was done. The 10 years of watching the district absorbed its small violences, the 48-hour case closure, Brace's flat face saying men like you don't matter. All of that had not made him angry so much as it had made him extremely, conclusively finished with the idea that the vow was serving anyone. His father had believed in the soup. Ren believed in his father. But the soup had not saved old Pak Chen, and it had not kept his sister from walking home 3 blocks to a world that had decided she didn't matter either, and there was a point at which you had to acknowledge that 30 years of excellent training was not soup. What his father had given him was this: a body that had been built specifically, deliberately, and comprehensively for what it was now doing. The training had started with the basics and proceeded outward in every direction: footwork, distance management, the grammar of how bodies move when they intend violence, and the small deviations that tell you what they're about to do before they've decided to do it. His father had insisted on observation. You won't always be able to practice, he'd said. You'll always be able to watch. And Ren had watched. Everything. For 10 years, the district had been his library. He had watched the Crimson Tier's enforcers work for a decade. He knew their patterns, the overhand right they defaulted to when they wanted to end something quickly, the way they clustered in the middle distance when working in groups, the tells in their shoulders when they were about to commit to a move. He had watched street fights in the markets and the alleys, and had catalogued what worked and what didn't, and had turned the useful things over quietly in his mind for years, without anywhere to put them. All of it was there. All of it was available. The body, his father used to say, does not forget anything you've taught it. It simply waits. 10 years was a long time to wait. The collection, accordingly, was substantial. There were things his father had built into him that he had never tested against anything real, and that turned out, when tested, to be extraordinary. The distance sense, his ability to track 3 or 4 people in a space simultaneously without appearing to watch any of them, was something he had always known he had, but had used only for cutting noodles in a crowded stall and navigating the market on busy mornings. Against the Tier's enforcers in the dark side streets of the Kaiwen district, it was something else entirely. He knew where each of them was going to be a half-step before they knew it themselves. He moved in the gaps they left without meaning to leave, and by the time the gap closed, he was already in the next one. His father had called this reading. Not a flashy word for it, not a dramatic one. Reading. The way you read a page, your eyes moving ahead of the word you're on, anticipating the shape of the sentence before it arrives. Every person in motion is a sentence you've almost read, his father had said, long ago in the back room, speaking quietly the way he always did. You learned to read when you were 6. You've been reading people since you were 4. You just haven't been allowed to finish the sentences. He was finishing them now. The other thing, the thing that was harder to name, was the accumulation itself. The sheer weight of observation stored over 10 years that had nowhere to go and had not, it turned out, degraded in storage. 10 years of standing at the stall and watching every fight, every confrontation, every late-night negotiation conducted in raised voices in the alley behind the market. He had seen the Tier's people work at every hour and in every condition, drunk and sober, confident and nervous, working alone and working in pairs and working in loose groups that thought they were a unit but weren't. He had watched outside operators come into the district on the occasions when Tong Sek needed something handled that the Tier's own people weren't suited for, and he had studied them with the same patient attention he gave everything, noting what they did that his father's training had covered, and what they did that suggested a different lineage. The result of all that watching, delivered through his father's foundation, was something the Tier's people had no framework for. They were experienced men, many of them, in their own way. They had worked in the district long enough to know what threats looked like. They had a reference set. The problem was that the reference set did not contain anything that operated the way Ren operated, without announcement, without the particular kind of tension that telegraphs intent, without any of the observable preparation that precedes committed action. He did not prepare visibly, because the preparation had already been done. He was, by the time they saw him, already in the middle of finishing the sentence he had started reading before they knew he was there. He took the second captain, a woman called Fen who handled the Northside gambling operations, on the 5th day. He found her at the counting house on Beacon Lane, which occupied the upper floor of a printing shop, whose owner had been renting it to the tier for 6 years under considerable duress. Ren went up the back stairs. Fen was faster than Vel and better positioned, and she had 2 dedicated personal guards who were a step above the standard enforcer quality. Men who moved with professional economy and who had, unlike the street post enforcers, some genuine training behind their footwork. The room was cramped and the light was poor. None of it mattered. The cramped room suited him better than it suited her. She needed space to manage her guards and give orders, and in a cramped room the guards couldn't protect her flanks effectively, and the moment the geometry resolved against her she was smart enough not to continue past understanding it. She sat against the wall with her hands raised and looked at him. In another world she might have been impressive. She clearly had been, once, before she'd built an organization around herself that had made her the kind of person who needed to be managed rather than the kind who did the managing herself. "What do you want?" she said. "The ledgers," Ren said. "All of them. Every account book this operation has. You know I can't give you those." "You can," Ren said. "You're choosing not to. Those are different things." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she looked at her 2 guards, who were both sitting down and not looking at anyone. She told Ren where the ledgers were. There were 4 of them, flat books in pale green covers, dense with columns in Fen's neat, very small handwriting. Ren looked at the first 3 pages of the first book. The accounts were thorough: fee collections, gambling revenues, the payroll line items for the precinct. Lao Yun's monthly allocation was on its own line, labeled in a way that was technically deniable and practically obvious. 11 years of payments, recorded with the precision of a woman who had understood, perhaps without ever saying it, that these records might someday need to be produced under conditions she hadn't controlled. He took all 4 books. "The stall on the Kaiwen main block," he said to Fen before he left. "Someone authorized that." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Brace." Ren nodded. He went down the back stairs. He made copies of the relevant pages at the print shop's equipment downstairs. The owner, a small man named Chun, who had been listening to the footsteps above his ceiling for 6 years with an expression of sustained misery, watched Ren work the press without comment and then locked his front door when Ren left, which suggested he knew more about what had just happened upstairs than he had been officially informed of. Ren kept the originals and sealed the copies in an envelope. Brace was the 3rd captain, and Brace was personal. Ren found him at the tier's secondary base in the district's northeast corner, a bar with a back room that served as a planning space. Brace had, by this point, clearly received information about how the previous encounters had gone, because he was not alone and the men with him were not standard enforcer stock. He had hired from outside the district 3 men who moved with professional correctness and had the specific economy of people who had done this work for money over a long period of time. Ren stood in the doorway for a moment and assessed the room. Then he went in. It was not fast, this one. The professionals were worth their hire in that sense. They were disciplined, they communicated with each other in the wordless shorthand of people who'd worked together, and they didn't commit to a move until they were reasonably certain of it. The room was close, and the furniture was heavy, and the light came from a single bulb overhead that cast everything in a flat yellowish glare. Ren liked the flat light. Shadows can deceive. Flat light tells you exactly what is in front of you. The problem the professionals had was that Ren was better at reading the wordless shorthand of people who'd worked together than they were at using it, because he had been watching people fight and work together in tight spaces for 10 years and doing nothing else with what he'd learned. He took the fastest one first, because the fastest one sets the pace for a group, and without a pace the other 2 had to improvise, and improvisation in a space that size and under that light against someone who was reading the sentences as fast as they were written, that was a losing position, and they discovered it quickly. Brace did not run, which Ren noted with something close to respect. He stood in the corner of the room and waited until it was only the two of them, his hands at his sides, his broad face finally showing something other than its usual unlived-in blankness. "You burned the stall," Ren said. "You came to us," Brace said. "You made noise. We send a message when someone makes noise. That's how it works." Old Pak Chen was 74 years old. "I didn't know who was upstairs." "No," Ren said. "You didn't look." Brace said nothing. His face had the look of a man who was recalibrating something, trying to locate on a map that had turned out not to be accurate in at least one significant respect. "You said men like me don't matter," Ren said. "I was wrong," Brace said. He said it flat, without inflection, as a simple correction of the factual record. Whether there was regret behind it was not possible to determine. Ren put him down carefully, without more force than was required, which was still a great deal of force, and left him in the back room. He straightened his jacket in the alley outside. He walked toward the district's interior. The district was talking by now. Not loudly. Kaiwen didn't do things loudly, but the conversations were happening. In the stalls and the shops and the upstairs flats and the school where May taught, people were saying things in the specific quiet way of people who aren't sure yet if what they're saying is going to be safe to have said. 3 captain-level people had disappeared from their posts. The street corners had thinned. The collection rounds for the month were incomplete. The protection fee reminder that usually arrived in the first week had not arrived. 2 people had already approached Ren directly, an older woman who ran a pharmacy 2 blocks from the former stall site, and a young man who drove deliveries in the district's south end, to say simply that they were glad. Not to offer help, not to make demands, simply to say that. Ren thanked them. He did not explain anything. He went back to what he was doing. May found him on the 6th evening at her kitchen table, working through the green ledgers with a pen, marking the pages that were most relevant to Lao Yun's involvement with the tier. Not everything, just the clearest lines, the ones that didn't require interpretation. The payroll entries, the dates, the amounts. 11 years of a man's corruption laid out in small, neat handwriting, patient as a record of rainfall. She sat down across from him. "How long?" she said. "1 or 2 more days," Ren said. She looked at the ledgers. She looked at her brother. She had her father's habit of not using more words than were necessary, and she used none now. She got up and made tea and put a cup in front of him and went to bed. He finished the ledgers around midnight. Tong Sek was not, by this point, operating from the district headquarters. He had moved to a different location, a building in the district's commercial fringe, a laundry operation on its ground floor that he'd owned through a third party for 7 years, the upper 2 floors converted to living quarters. He had kept the location restricted to his inner circle. He had also, by the 8th day since the headquarters incident, assembled around him every capable person the Crimson Tier still had operational in the Kaiwen district, which was fewer than he would have liked, because the attrition of the previous week had been significant and ongoing in ways he hadn't been able to fully account for because nobody who could give him a clear account was in any condition to give one. He had made calls outside the district. He had explained the situation in terms that were professionally embarrassing but accurate. He had arranged for additional support to come in. The support arrived on the evening of the 8th day. 4 men from the West Seat organization, reliable, expensive, and specifically said to be available for complicated situations. They came into the upper room and looked at Tong Sek's remaining people and did not say anything about what they saw, which was professional of them. Tong Sek had dealt with complicated situations before. He had never dealt with one like this, which was why, sitting in the upper room with his 8 remaining men and his 4 new arrivals, and the laundry machinery running its low rhythm below them, he felt something he had not felt in 20 years of building the tier from nothing into what it was. He felt that he might have miscalculated. Not about the Noodle Man specifically. He still didn't fully understand what the Noodle Man was, which was itself the problem. You cannot manage a threat, you cannot classify. The men the tier used were classifiable. The outside operators they occasionally hired were classifiable. You paid them, and you used them, and you knew what to expect. The noodle man was not classifiable. 12 people sent to manage him, and they had come back degraded, or not come back at all, and none of them had given Tong Sek a clear account of what had actually happened, only that it had happened very quickly, and very precisely, and without any of the signs that usually announced a professional operator, no organization behind it, no money trail, no apparent agenda beyond taking the tier apart one level at a time, with the methodical patience of a man who was working through a to-do list. He had a man watching the flat where the sister lived. He had heard that the noodle man was staying there. He knew the sister had been the beginning of this. The two enforcers who'd made that decision were long gone from the city, which was the only smart thing they'd done, and he had thought, on the second day, about using the sister again, applying more pressure, seeing if that lever still worked. He had decided against it, not for ethical reasons, for practical ones. The first application of that lever had produced this. A second application, if anything, would make the situation catastrophically worse, and the situation was already very bad. He should have calculated that the first time. He thought about Brace's report of the original visit, the man who had come in, quietly, and explained what had happened to his sister, and listened to Brace's answer, and gone. He just went home, Tong Sek said to himself, alone in his thoughts. He went home, and he held it for weeks, and we burned everything else he had. The machine had sent its message. The message had been received. The response had not been anticipated because nobody had known there was anything to anticipate. A noodle man, a stall, no record, no known associations, nothing in any file that would have told you what was sitting behind those quiet eyes for 30 years. Ren Hao came in through the laundry. He had established where Tong Sek was through the same method he'd been using all week. Patient, unhurried attention to who was moving where in the district, who was delivering food to which addresses in the commercial fringe, which car made a particular route 3 times in 3 days, which window stayed lit in the upper floor of the building above the laundry. The district told you things, if you had grown up watching it and had good reason to pay attention. He had both. He went through the laundry floor first. The workers there looked at him and then looked away, the specific practiced unseeing that the Kaiwen district had spent years perfecting. He went up the back stair. What followed in the next 40 minutes was the most demanding work he had done all week, because Tong Sek had, by accident of consolidation, put his best remaining people in one building. The West Seat men were good. They spread correctly when the first contact happened, didn't bunch, didn't panic, communicated in compressed signals that a lesser reader would have missed. They made him work for each room in a way the earlier encounters hadn't. He worked through the rooms methodically. He was not in a hurry. His father had believed in unhurriedness above everything. A technique applied in haste spends itself. A technique applied in time multiplies itself. And Ren was applying 30 years of multiplied patience to a single week's work. Each room taught him something small about the next one. By the time he reached the upper room, he had a clear picture of what was left, and what it would take, and how long. He found Tong Sek in the upper room, which was the last room. Tong Sek was standing in the center of the space, not hiding, not positioned for anything, just standing, the way a man stands who has run out of what standing behind things provides, and has decided that the only remaining dignified option is to be upright and in the open when it arrives. He was a heavy-set man, and the years showed in his face, in the specific way they show in men who have lived by making other people afraid. The lines were too deep in the wrong places. The eyes were watchful in a way that had nothing restful about it. He looked at Ren for a moment. He looked at the doorway. He looked at the room behind Ren, which was quiet, in the way rooms are quiet when the thing they contained has been resolved. 20 years, Tong Sek had run this district. 20 years of building it fee by fee, arrangement by arrangement, precinct by precinct, until the whole of the Kaiwen district was, in the practical and meaningful sense, his. Not on paper. Nothing was on paper that the investigative bureau had ever found useful, but in the real sense, in the sense of who opened their stall at what hour, and who received what consideration for opening it. He had built that from a collection route, and 3 men, and the thing he had built had operated without significant challenge for 11 of those years, and he had been, in his private understanding of things, proud of that. He had not anticipated this. He lowered himself to his knees, carefully, with the particular care of a large man whose joints had seen better years. He put his hands flat on the floor in front of him and looked at the boards and said nothing for a moment, as if he were searching the grain of the wood for a version of the evening that went differently. "The 2 who went after your sister," he said finally. "I'm telling you I didn't order it. That's true. Brace authorized it without bringing it to me. That's also true. It doesn't change what it was." Ren looked at him. 20 years of the district in this man's face. 20 years of fees and broken hands and closed case files and a bought precinct commander, and all the small, careful arrangements that keep an operation running, and underneath all of it the same simple proposition that every organization like this ran on, that the people around you did not have more to gain than they had to lose. "I want to negotiate," Tong Sek said. "I want to talk about terms. I have resources that aren't in any ledger, associations that—" "There's nothing to negotiate," Ren said. "The ledgers go to the investigative bureau tonight. Every account, every name on the payroll line." The room was quiet. The laundry machinery ran below them, its low institutional rhythm unchanged and indifferent to what was happening directly above it. "The stall," Tong Sek said. He seemed to be working towards something, not an argument, just an accounting, the way certain kinds of men work through what happened to them when they've run out of alternatives. "Brace told me you came in, said what happened to your sister, and went home, that you were cooperative, that there was no reason to escalate." A pause. "He lied to me about that part. The escalation wasn't measured. He burned you down because he could, because you were the noodle man, and nobody checks on what happens to noodle men." "Old Pak Chen was 74 years old," Ren said. "I heard." Tong Sek looked at the floor. 74. 74. A silence that had weight in it. "Lao Yun," Tong Sek said finally. It wasn't a question. It was a man acknowledging the shape of what was happening to him, the specific shape, the exact contours of the thing he'd built finding their way into a form he had not designed and could not control. "Especially Lao Yun," Ren said. Tong Sek stayed on his knees. He did not argue. He did not bargain further. Whatever 20 years of building something gives a man, the certainty, the weight, the particular solidity of a person who has not truly been challenged in a very long time, it had reached its end in this room, on this floor, and he knew it with the clarity that some people only find when every alternative has been removed. The district's system had produced, out of its own machinery, the specific thing that unmade it. A man with 30 years of preparation, 10 years of patience, and nothing left to lose, arriving methodically at the top. Ren left him there. He went down through the laundry, which was still running, and the workers still did not look at him, and he went out into the night air of the Kaiwen district, and stood for a moment on the street outside the building. It was late. The district was its nighttime self. The narrow streets, the overhead wires, the particular quiet of a place that had learned to be quiet. He stood there long enough to feel it properly, and what he felt was not triumph, exactly. Something quieter than that. Something that had more in common with finishing a long, uninterrupted piece of work than with winning anything. Then he went to deliver the ledgers. The investigative bureau was housed in the city's administrative district, 3 kilometers from Kaiwen. It did not report to any precinct commander. It had a duty officer at all hours, which was relevant because Ren arrived at 20 past midnight with the 4 green ledgers and the sealed envelope of copies, and the duty officer was a young woman in her late 20s who looked at him and at the ledgers and at his jacket and had the very specific expression of someone who is going to have a long night and knows it. He explained what the ledgers contained. He explained the payroll line. He explained which accounts corresponded to which 9th precinct allocation, and specifically to Chief Lao Yun's personal monthly. He answered the officer's questions directly and without embellishment. She had a recorder running. He did not mind. When she asked his name and occupation, he said, "Ren Hao. I run a noodle stall." He paused. "I ran a noodle stall." She looked at him. "The one on the Kaiwen main block." "It burned," he said. She wrote something down. "We'll need you for follow-up questions." "I'm available," he said. He left the originals with her and kept the copies in the envelope. He walked home. What followed happened over the next 6 days, which was fast by the Investigative Bureau's standards, but not unprecedented when the primary documentation arrived pre-organized with relevant page markers, and the subject of the inquiry was a district precinct commander whose payroll line had been maintained by the same syndicate operation for 11 years, and whose financial records, once subpoenaed, matched the ledger entries precisely and without gap. Chief Lao Yun was placed on administrative suspension on the 3rd day. He was formally arrested on the 5th. He made his appearance at the Bureau's administrative wing on a morning that happened to be clear, the kind of morning the city got occasionally in the late season, when the air was sharp and the light came in at a low angle and made everything look like it had edges. Lao Yun walked in with his lawyer and his professional composure intact, the pleasant face still deployed, the particular ease still present in his shoulders, and someone from the Bureau's press office had notified a reporter, because that was how these things went, and the reporter was there with a camera, and the pleasant face and the professional composure were in a photograph the following morning that the district's residents saw over their breakfast. And the people of the Kaiwen district, who had spent years memorizing the specific careful language of not making statements that could be attributed to them, looked at that photograph and allowed themselves, privately, a feeling that did not have a safe public name, but that everyone in the district recognized. Ren Hao was not there. He did not go to watch. He was in the Kaiwen district, where a man named Chun from the print shop had lent him a folding table and 2 chairs and set them up on the pavement outside the gutted stall site, because the ground clearance work had started 3 days ago and the site was open and clean, just the foundation slab and some cleared framing, and Chun had said, in the oblique way that Kaiwen people said things, that it seemed like a reasonable place for a man who needed somewhere to be. Ren had borrowed a pot and a burner. The bones had gone in at 5:30. By the time the water came to heat, the first customers were already there. The pharmacy woman, the delivery driver, old Shen with his twice-healed hand around a bowl, May's school colleague who had walked the long way to be here, 6 or 7 others who had heard what Ren was doing this morning and had decided to come. He set the bowls out. He cut the noodles. Even. People came and went all morning. Most of them didn't say much. This was Kaiwen, and Kaiwen didn't say much. But they came, which was its own kind of speech. The pharmacy woman lingered longest, watching the street. There was nothing on the street corners to watch in the old way. The posts were empty. The red sashes were gone. The particular texture of the air in the district, the quality of careful navigation, the unconscious route adjustments people made to avoid certain doorways and certain times of day, was already shifting, loosening, in the way that a held breath loosens when the thing you were bracing for has passed. A few of them, settling in to eat, looked at the open sky where the stall's roof used to be, and at the clean foundation slab, and at Ren moving behind his borrowed table, and they had the expression of people who are cautiously permitting themselves to believe that a thing has changed. It had. The Crimson Tears street posts in the Kaiwen district were empty. They would not fill again. The protection fee did not go out that month, or the month after, or any month following, because the organization that had issued it was being systematically documented, and its principals were in the process of finding out what happened when 11 years of meticulous records fell into the hands of people who knew how to read them. Tong Sek was in custody. Brace was in custody. Fen was cooperating with the Bureau's accountants and finding, in the process, that her very neat ledger-keeping was now the primary instrument of the case against the organization she'd spent years building, which was a species of justice that had a certain clean geometry to it. The precinct was under review. The district's investigative oversight was being restructured. These were slow processes, bureaucratic and imperfect, and Ren harbored no illusions that the district would transform overnight into something it hadn't been before. But the Crimson Tear was gone from Kaiwen. And something else was gone too, the specific quality of held breath that the district had maintained for 11 years, the particular way people moved through the streets, as though the streets might at any moment require them to have not been there. That quality was lifting. You could see it in small things. The pharmacy woman had moved her display stand 18 inches further onto the pavement than it had sat for years, because there was nobody to tell her to put it back. The delivery driver was taking the direct route through the market square instead of the long way around the north block, because the long way had been the route you took to avoid the tier's corner post, and the corner post wasn't there anymore. These were tiny adjustments, invisible to anyone who hadn't been watching the district for a long time, but Ren had been watching it for a long time, and he saw them, and he understood what they were. And the 48-hour case closure that had put Lao Yun's name in Ren's memory was the specific item the Bureau had found most useful in establishing a pattern of conduct, which meant that the thing that had started this, May, the walk home, the 3 blocks, was now legally central to the case that had taken down the precinct commander and the syndicate simultaneously. The doubters and the instruments and the architects of 11 years of the district's particular misery were in the process of accounting for it with the same methodical precision that the misery itself had once been administered. May came by at noon. She sat across the folding table, and Ren put a bowl in front of her. She ate for a while. She looked at the open sky and the foundation slab, and the street that had changed in the past 10 days in ways she was still cataloging, the particular loosening of the air, the way people walked differently when they were not afraid of the corner they were about to turn. "Are you going to rebuild?" she said. "Eventually," Ren said. "Same spot?" He looked at the foundation slab. The concrete was good. His father had poured it himself, 40 years ago, because his father had believed in doing things properly at the beginning. "Same spot," he said. May nodded. She finished the bowl. She put it on the table and sat for another moment. "He would have broken it earlier," she said. Not unkindly, not even sadly. As a fact, the way she stated most facts. Ren considered this. "Maybe," he said. "He also would have kept it until he broke it," she said. "Like you did." She picked up her bag and went back to the school. Ren washed the bowl. He put the bones back in the pot. He cut more noodles, even, and set the bowls out and stood at his borrowed table in the open air of the Kaiwen district, while the afternoon light came down at its low angle and made everything look like it had edges. He was 32 years old. He had run a stall since his father died. He had kept a vow for 10 years, and then set it down, and what had been on the other side of the vow had turned out to be exactly what his father had built it to be: complete, patient, and sufficient. The world had not become better overnight. The soup was still going. But the stone was out of the shoe, and the foot was walking differently, and from where Ren Hao was standing, at a borrowed table on a clean foundation slab on a narrow street in the Kaiwen district, that seemed like enough for one morning. The next customer sat down. He handed them a bowl,